Mhm. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Shareholder Committee. My name's Stephen Conway. I'm the leader of the Council and the Executive Member for Housing Partnerships on the Local Plan, and I'm going to be chairing this meeting. I do need to go through a few housekeeping rules before we begin. There are not any fire drills planned this evening. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building via the nearest exit and gather at muster point 2, which is located in the car park at the rear of the building. And please note that the meeting is currently being webcast live, so you're going to be very famous. Okay, if we could go on to apologies. Oh, no, I think I need to introduce a few people. We have on screen Simon Dale. Simon is Managing Director of Loddon Homes. We also have Priya Patel, Head of Democratic Services, and Karina Andrea, who's here working in Democratic Services as a work experience placement. Welcome, Karina. Andrew Moulton, who is the Assistant Director for Governance and the Council's Monitoring Officer. And around the table, I'm going to ask people to introduce themselves. A radical move. But I'm going to start with you, George.
Thank you, Chair. George Fremelico, Director of Place and Growth.
Karen Howick, Head of Operations for Loddon and Berrybrook Homes.
Pauline Jorgensen, Leader of the Opposition.
Prue Bray, I'm the Executive Member for Children's Services and Deputy Leader.
Good evening, I'm Imogen Shepherd-Bay. I am the Executive Member for Finance and Governance.
Graham Ebers, Deputy Chief Executive of Wokingham Borough Council.
And Chief Finance Officer, you didn't mention that bit.
And Chief Finance Officer.
Yes,
Poison chalice heads in your direction.
thank you, everyone. And so if we can just note the apologies of Mark Ashwell, who is a member of this shareholder committee, but is unfortunately unable to be here this evening. I don't think there are any other apologies for absence. I think, is Kajal normally an attender? Should we note that she's submitting her apologies because she's on holiday, I think, which seems a very good reason not to be here. But let's just note Kajal is not with us, but she's the author of quite a few of the reports we'll be looking at. Or is a major contributor to them. Can we move on to item 19, minutes of the previous meeting? We're asked to confirm the minutes of the meeting of 27th of March. Are there any comments or queries regarding that, or are you content for me to sign it as an accurate record? Those in favour of signing it as an accurate record, please show.
I think only we're out. And I wasn't there anyway, so...
Well, there's a double impediment. Okay, thank you. All right. Right. We now move on to declarations of interest. And I think you have to specify what the nature of your interest is and what it relates to in the agenda. So I think both Prue and I need to declare an interest. Prue?
Yes. So it's in every item on the agenda apart from the public questions and the parish council questions, because I'm director of the holding company, which housing companies are held by still.
Yeah, and exactly the same declaration of interest applies to me for all of the items on the agenda apart from the questions, and in relation to the same interest as a director of Working Borough Council Holdings.
Chairman, just obviously I'm a director, but I'm not voting, so I don't need to declare anything.
Well, you don't, but you've just done so. That's what's called belt and braces, but thank you for that anyway, Graham. So we move on to public questions. I don't believe there are any public questions. Is that correct, Priya? Thank you. I don't think there are any parish or town council questions either. And no questions from elected members. No, that's correct. Right, so we move straight on to the matters for consideration. And we start with item 25, which is the Shareholder Committee overview of reports, which begins on page 9 of your agenda. And Simon, would you like to speak to this item? Oh, sorry, it's George's report, not Simon's. I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Councillor Conway. Just very briefly, you'll see the purpose of this report is just to set, if you like, the scene for the other reports presented by the company. It asks that the Shareholder Committee notes the reports and information provided by the Managing Director and the other reports submitted, and provides comments and direction to the company. You'll see in the report as well that the context of how the council strategy sits, and also the company mission statements as well, just to provide that overall context in terms of direction of travel and priority. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, George. Are there any comments anyone wants to make in relation to this overview, which is obviously a helpful introduction and sets the scene for what's to come?
That's a question.
Yes. Pauline, do you want to ask them in relation to this or when we get to the individual reports?
No, it's on this particular one.
Okay, please go ahead.
It's the same question as I think I asked at the previous meeting I was at, which is, this is an overview, but it doesn't show how much money was essentially contributed to the council because of these companies. And I think it would be good to do that, to give a fair view of how these companies are actually benefiting the residents. I think I said that time before last as well.
I'm sure you've made that point before. Obviously, we have been in the position where we've been having to sort out the finances of the company and get a true picture of what the situation is. I'm not sure we're in the position of being able to report that kind of detail at this stage. Is there anybody who wants to comment on Pauline's question or give a response? Graham?
Yeah, I think I can partially help, albeit it's not the full story, but one of the most significant contributions that aren't as visible through these papers is the on lending from the council. We borrow from PWLB and we have to charge at a markup in order to ensure it's at market rate, which is approximately 1%. And the benefit in this year, 25-26, to the general fund will be about £190,000. There may be other less direct benefits associated with the company not articulated in the papers, such as contributions to support services, for example, legal. And of course, as the company ventures into specialist accommodation, then that contribution becomes much more significant and may not be as visible as it could be, because of course it's a lot of cost avoidance generated elsewhere in the council. So I can answer the the interest aspect much more easily than the other components of the full jigsaw.
As you
as it were.
say, Graham, the differential in the interest payments is a contribution, but it's the obvious one. But there are a lot of indirect benefits, the provision of social and affordable housing, the provision of specialist accommodation that clearly will save the council money in the long run. So those, to give you a complete answer, would require us to factor in all of that.
Wasn't what road I was after, really. I was after the figure that Graham just gave me. And I did warn him beforehand. So,
Yeah, well, that figure obviously is an important part of the story.
I think
but
it's
not the full story.
I think it's important that this report shows that, or at least shows the benefit to the council. And I agree, the other benefits are much more difficult to quantify and a lot very complicated to calculate, I would imagine.
Yeah, and ultimately maybe much more valuable.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And
Okay.
I guess just Pauline shouldn't have mentioned she warned me beforehand because it made me look quite good at that moment. So.
I'm sorry.
Well, it did. It was very impressive that you got that
You would have known
information at
anyway,
your
Graham.
fingertips. But I'm sure you would have done anyway, as Pauline said. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments in relation to this overview of reports? Okay. If there aren't, can we just agree the recommendation that the Shareholder Committee notes the reports and information revised direction and comments to the local housing company? That's on page 9. Those in favour? Thank you. Yeah, I keep looking at Pauline, but I need to just look at this way. That's okay. Thank you very much. Can we move on to item 26 then, which is on page 13, or begins on page 13 of your agenda. And this is the local housing company's managing director overview. And it's really to Simon, I think we now turn. I was going to turn to you earlier, Simon, but I'm now turning to you correctly to introduce this item for us.
Yes, thanks, Chair. And can I firstly apologise for two things? Firstly, I've been away and amazingly in 35 degrees worth of heat I've come back with a cold, so if my voice gives out then it's not because I've been abusing my body during my holiday, it's because I've genuinely picked up a cold, which sometimes happens, as we all know. And the second thing is I would love to have been there in person tonight, but unfortunately we've had a family bereavement, and I feel my place is to be with the family, supporting my wife whose sister passed away last week, so I do apologise for not being there tonight in body, as it were. But the next best thing is to be online to support the committee, which I'm very willing to do. This is a standing report which we're beginning to develop and have done over the last few months, really, which kind of just directs and signposts members to items of interest, which you will want to probably ask questions about, etc. Covers the agenda that you've got tonight in the first part of the report, and then picks up on specifically what we've been doing. And certainly in the last couple of years that I've been involved with the local housing companies, we've needed to look at three particular areas which are referred to at the bottom of page 13, and that is about us becoming more financially sustainable. And if you've read the reports tonight, particularly with the projected outturns, you can see that the companies and the council, and particularly I do mark out the support of the council. It's been a very, very hard work and long hours working at it, but I think there's an emerging picture of us being able to get a real understanding of how the company's finances are working, and a lot of tidying up on the balance sheet. So I think that there is a trend where the companies are becoming far more financially sustainable, and that's been a priority. Some governance and structure issues have been dealt with, and we see evidence of that tonight with the third meeting, I think, of the Shareholder Committee, maybe even the fourth. And also good news on the development pipeline, which Karen will talk a little bit more about, and the exciting things that could potentially be happening with the forthcoming strategy, which is due for approval in the later part of the year once you've had a chance to have a look at the draft strategy. But you can see from that last paragraph there on page 13, Loddon Homes genuinely in real terms is now beginning to return a modest surplus to the council in trading. But we are trading in certain times, and particularly with interest rates and things like that, each and every transaction that we do, any potential development has to be looked at in full depth and with due diligence, etc. We've been doing a deep dive in partnership with the council and looking at internal costs ourselves over the last year or two, and that's reaped some rewards as well, with savings in overheads, a better understanding of how costs are recharged between the companies and the council, and indeed internally as well. And that has really allowed for that emerging picture. The one-off effect of intercompany adjustments, which you'll have seen going through the books as well, that's been a real bit of progress that we've made together, which again is I've already commented on. The shareholder committee's establishment, I think, has seen that switch between elected members moving away from the board, and you'll remember the scrutiny that we had on that, and that seems to be operating pretty well as far as I'm concerned. Yes, there's a lot of repetition in it, but it's an opportunity to really expose the work of the and display the work rather than expose the work of the local housing companies. And senior officers have moved in as directors of the company and bring their professional expertise to the board, and we're seeing that begin to benefit the emerging picture with the housing companies and the reset, if you like. We're looking at the necessity around Wokingham Housing Limited and of holdings. Obviously, the Wokingham housing situation is that we now avail ourselves of development services with the council directly through a service level agreement, and we're looking at minimal costs passing through that books. There's no intention to close down Wokingham Housing Limited, because it may be that the council would have a use for it in the future, but we don't want large costs going through for it and having to produce statutory accounts necessarily. And as I say, we're looking at the future of the holdings company, the parent company, now that we have the shareholder in committee in operation. And in terms of the development pipeline, as I've said, we started off relatively cautiously. We took on a couple of houses of multiple occupancy last year. We acquired some shared ownership properties as well, but they've reaped real dividends. And in actual fact, when we were talking about what the companies have given back to the council, I can think of a figure in terms of cost avoidance that Graham referred to, which is in excess of a couple of £100,000, which, you know, would have hit the council's revenue account in adult and children's services. But by doing things through the local housing company, that actually allows us to save revenue for the council, and that's obviously very, very beneficial, and we're looking at other opportunities in that respect as well. So we're keen on those to pursue those initiatives, and we've been commissioned to do some further work on that in 25-26. In terms of the actions that arose from the meeting in March, we are looking at the prospect or awaiting a briefing note from George, actually, to present to us about the possibility of becoming some form of management company, but the local housing company needs to understand what the council's requirement would be of that, and that would be probably something vested within Berrybrook Homes rather than Loddon Homes as the registered provider, because that would mean a change of or deregistering ourselves as a registered provider if there was a diversification. And then the other action was around the private rented sector and how we might meet local need, which would also help us with the stock portfolio, and Karen will probably go into a little bit more detail on that in her item later in the report. Financially, I think I've talked a lot about that. We've changed our auditor this year, and we've built up a really, really good relationship with Buzzercott. They've completed their work, and again, we've got that report for you on the agenda. And then the other good thing that we're wanting to introduce into the company's world is medium-term financial planning, as the council do it as well, so that we look at it over that medium term, and we also first consider those reports in the pre-Christmas period, again in line with how local authorities in Wokingham account and budget for their financial services, as it were. So that's the overview of the reports tonight. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Simon. I'll turn to Prue and Pauline in a minute, but I just wanted to say a few words myself. Obviously, many items of substance, particularly the draft development strategy and development pipeline, we're going to be looking at in more detail later on in the meeting. But I just want to say that some really encouraging developments here. I'm really pleased to see a development strategy emerging. I'm very pleased to see a development pipeline that looks more secure. We're taking small steps. There's still much we need to do, but some really promising signs there. And the contribution that the housing companies are making through specialist accommodation is immensely welcome. It really is valuable. My ambition has always been that we try and ensure that the housing companies complement rather than compete with the HRA. And I think we're getting closer to that optimal position. And this discussion about the housing companies exploring the option of becoming private renters, intervening in the private rental market, I think is a sign of that greater differentiation of function, which I'm keen to encourage. I really can't let this pass, though, without saying a word of thanks to Kajal for the heroic work that she and no doubt other colleagues, Karen, I'm sure, was involved in this too, have played in sorting out the complexities of historical difficulties that have ran through the accounts of the different companies. And the sorting that out and getting us to a sounder position where we fully understand exactly what's going on has been an enormous step forward, enormous. And we're now starting, I think, to see modest surpluses emerging and real reasons to be optimistic about the future. So a very big thank you to all of those involved, but I'd like to especially note our thanks to Kajal, who sadly can't be here to hear it, but if we can record it in the minutes, she'll get to know. So Prue and then Pauline.
I just wanted to check, on page 14 there's a reference to a workshop that was held on the 10th of July. Karen, are you going to cover that in your report? That's fine, okay, I'll wait till then.
Pauline?
I had a couple of questions. The senior council officers as directors, who are they? I did have a look on Company's House, but it wasn't clear at the end of it who were actually directors.
Yeah. Would you like me
what
to answer that,
the
Stephen?
Logic was the other thing.
Well, George is one. Emma is one. I can't remember his
Rianne Hayes
Rihanna is one.
was.
I was going to say Rihanna's left the organisation,
yeah.
So she won't be one any longer.
Right, and we've
And the logic behind each person.
Well, obviously, part of the logic is specialist
Yeah,
accommodation.
exactly. That's what I'm interested in.
Would anybody else like to?
Yeah, I think I'm probably. I can't see who you're watching me, Stephen. I can't see on the screen.
Yes.
Yeah. So the logic behind each appointment was that George was invited as the principal contact for the housing companies, with him having the housing portfolio within his directorate mix. His deputy at the time, Rianne Hayes, who's left the authority now, as we know, because she was the overall head of housing, both strategically and operationally, at the point when she departed the council, she was invited to be director. We've subsequently proposed, and yet to be, I think, confirmed, Karen might know more than me with me being on leave, but we've subsequently proposed that that Helen Armstrong Christie assumes and takes the place of Rianne. We have Emma, whose surname escapes me. I do apologise. Emma Cockrell. Yeah. With her expertise in the children's services world, where we are obviously supporting the push on adult and children's to deliver, supported and specialist housing solutions and reduce cost for the council. And then the third person, and a very important one as far as us being a registered provider is concerned, and the regulator's view, is that we should have some finance expertise involved in the board activity. So Mark Thompson, the council's chief accountant, head of corporate resources, corporate finance, I should say, is also a director. So we think we've got a really good, strong mix there of the disciplines that require us to be an effective local housing company.
And I may add, just to help Pauline, I hope, that mix of directors also ensures that the housing companies are fully aware of the council's priorities and work towards helping to realise them. And I think that's the great advantage of having senior council officers sitting on these committees. these boards, because they give greater continuity of personnel, but also they give a very strong sense of how we want, as a corporate body, to work with the housing companies and realise the benefits they can bring.
So the second question was, I noticed you mentioned in paragraph 3, houses of multiple occupancy. It looks to me from reading the rest of it that you're buying large houses and then converting them into HMOs. How many have you got and where are they?
The two that were acquired last year, Pauline, were actually existing houses of multiple occupation. I prefer not to actually state where the locations are, if that's okay, in a public meeting. But we can obviously provide you with details of that outside of the meeting. The one that we're actually in the process of acquiring at the moment is a former residential property, which we would be looking to renovate and turn into a different use. But we'll look at whatever opportunities are available, and I'm sure Karen can cover some of the rationale, the criteria for the acquisition in her presentation later on.
Thank you, Simon. Prue wants to come in.
They're not general houses of...
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, they're not general houses of multiple occupation. They're specifically for care leavers. So it's basically supported accommodation for care leavers.
Yeah.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah, and that, of course, Pauline, just to add a little bit more to that, is again a contribution towards controlling future costs for the council. So it is quite important. Okay, has that answered your questions, or did you have one more?
No, that was it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pauline. Okay, so if we can just now, I think our recommendation is just to raise questions regarding content. We've done that, I think. So I think we've done our duty, and I don't think we need to vote on any formal recommendation. If we can move now on to item 27, which is development pipeline. This is under your name again, Simon.
Yeah. I'm asking that Karen talk to this one, Stephen, if that's okay. I like to credit where credit's due.
Karen has been fingered as the person who's going to talk on this one, so even though your name's on the agenda, I'm going to turn to Karen. Karen, if you'd like to present that.
Thank you. So in terms of recommendation, there isn't any specific recommendation that we're looking for here. We're just asking the committee to note and ask any questions in relation to the development pipeline. So as you will see, things are progressing well with the acquisition of a HMO property for young care leavers. That was the property that Simon spoke about with regards to us converting it from a general use family home to a HMO. We are looking to deliver that somewhere in towards the end of Q2. Tender returns for the works have come back last week. We're just working through those at the moment and putting in a bid application for Homes England funding to help deliver that, looking at making any cost savings where we can. Pauline, in reference to your earlier question around choice base for HMOs, we are looking for properties that are easily accessible to local amenities, local services and transport links, but also being mindful of the neighbours of the properties, making sure that they're not densely populated areas. The general needs property that we are acquiring from another registered provider is progressing well. We've just produced a schedule of works and we'll go out to tender for those works. They're relatively low scale in terms of just basic alterations. And then the acquisition of Section 106 site over in Bracknell, again, that's progressing really well. We're under conveyancing and hope to see that delivered in Q2 as well. Any delay to that scheme will likely be because of a change of use, so a deed of variation has been required through Bracknell Forest Homes. We continue to bid on a range of Section 106 properties. We're working really closely with our colleagues in Housing Commissioning now to consider how we can work together to deliver the most financially profitable scheme that works well from a financial appraisal perspective. And then in regards to the private rented sector, as you noted in Simon's report, we held a workshop on the 10th of July. We invited colleagues from the council, from the housing service, to participate in that as well as the development team, to see how we move forward. What it was great was it brought everybody onto the same page for how we go forward and how we can explore entering that new market for us. So a range of actions have come out of that, and an update will go to the local housing company boards in September, and then it will come back to yourselves to see that update in October. And I think that was it from me, unless there's any specific questions.
Well, a comment really on the private rented sector and also on bidding for Section 106 sites. Yeah. First of all, the private rented sector, I'm assuming that if we're able to engage effectively as a private renter, the profits that we'll be able to earn from that can be indirectly used to support the delivery of affordable housing.
Yeah, that would be the hope for any excess revenue that is returned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on the Section 106 sites, this is, I think, a period of great opportunity, both for the housing companies and the HRA, because we know that a lot of registered providers are reluctant to bid because they're focusing on tenant satisfaction measures and improvement of their housing stock so they can meet new regulatory standards. Yeah. And that reluctance, although it's potentially quite worrying because it could mean that some sites do not deliver the affordable housing we're hoping they will deliver, it equally presents an opportunity for the companies and the HRA, which I hope we're going to be able to take advantage of. Yeah. We know that Homes England it has received a very substantial boost to the amount of money it has at its disposal to use to support the delivery of affordable housing. I know we're working both as an organisation here in Wokingham, but also with other Berkshire councils to see what can be done to lever in some of that Homes England money to support housing delivery. Is there anything specific that this money could do to help our housing companies?
Yeah, so if we are looking at additionality above the Section 106 offering, we are engaging with some developers around that, potentially acquiring more of the site and then seeking to get Homes England funding for that. I would say it's also critical for the delivery of any supported housing scheme because we know the cost of running those properties is higher than your general needs stock. So that's certainly somewhere where we would look to leverage a greater grant from Homes England.
I suppose at a time when we're acutely conscious as a council of the government withdrawing some financial support from us, it in a sense becomes even more imperative that where funding support is available, we take advantage of it. And we know that £39 billion has been allocated to Homes England to try and support the delivery of affordable housing over the course of this Parliament. And I'm very, very keen that we get hold of at least a slice of that money.
It's even more important with the increase of the rate of interest that we're having to pay and the cost of build and acquisition to offset some of those additional financial pressures.
Effectively a subsidy from Homes England to make any of this possible.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Karen. Are there any other questions to Karen? I'm not sure whether that's a hand up from you, Imogen, or not. No, it's not. But it is from Pauline. Prue. Prue?
I just had a couple of questions here. I presume from reading between the lines here that Armencona was too big?
Yes, it was. And also to access borrowings from Public Works Loan Board, we felt we had to demonstrate community benefit, and because of the size and location of that site, we felt the funds would be better utilised elsewhere.
Thank you. And I don't know how far in this report are you covering the whole report?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was interested in the comment about land opportunities and the fact that the Borough Council's land is not, there isn't Borough Council land suitable. We have in the past built on quite a few derelict garage sites and that sort of stuff. I'm just wondering if there are any of those left or whether we just haven't looked at them.
Yeah, that was picked up today in a meeting with our council colleagues, and there is going to be a review of housing revenue account land, of which the garage sites would sit under, and those smaller pockets of land.
This comes back, although, Pauline, to the point I raised earlier on about the importance of securing complementarity in the work of the HRA and the housing company.
You can easily miss stuff.
Well, equally, we don't necessarily want the housing companies trying to acquire land that might help sustain the future of the HRA as well. I mean, it's important to recognise we need to grow the HRA, not just keep it static, because it does diminish in size from exercising the right to buy, and unless we add new stock to it, we end up with a problem of increased liabilities for repair and maintenance without any new income coming in on new properties. So we have to strike a balance between the needs of the housing companies and the needs of the HRA.
That segues quite nicely into the other question, which was there's no completions in this reporting period. Am I right in, I can't remember to be honest, is the Gorse Ride in the HRA not in this?
Gorse Ride, the first phase was in modern, but the subsequent phases are in the HRA.
And that's for that reason?
Well, in part it's for that reason, yes. Okay. Is that your questions?
I think so. Let me just look. Yeah, I didn't. Sorry, there was one more question. I didn't understand the point about no grant transference liability to Loddon Homes on page 19.
Where is that?
Top of page 19, it says it has been confirmed there's no grant transference liability to Loddon Homes for this transaction. I don't quite understand what that means.
Because we are acquiring it from another registered provider, you have to review the grant that was originally provided to them. So we take the grant with the property. And there is no additional liability unless it comes to the point where Loddon Homes were to dispose of the stock, which there is no intention to.
Okay.
So if they did decide to dispose of it, would that mean they'd have to pay the grant back?
Yes, and that's standard practice for any disposal.
Yeah.
Unless we sold it on to another registered provider, at which point they would then take on the grant liability.
I heard disembodied agreement from over there. I think it was possibly Simon agreeing. Was it Simon?
Yeah, I was going to say I think it's commonly known as clawback.
Yeah. Yes, sounds deeply unpleasant. But if we could, unless there are any other questions or comments on the development pipeline, other than saying thank you very much for all the work that's gone into this. It is really encouraging to see it moving in the right direction, and there's some really hopeful signs in there. I'm not going to highlight some of them because they're still in the process of negotiation and discussion, but there's some really potentially interesting developments that could, I think, help the housing companies and the council in its ambitions to deliver affordable housing. So this is encouraging, and thank you. Thank you both. Even though you didn't present the report, Simon, I'll include you in the thanks. But it's back to you now, I think, for the draft development strategy.
Well, not quite. I was by protocol. My name is on the report, but as I say, this has been led on by Karen, right. Where development is particularly one of her specialities. She knows far more about it than I do, but obviously I'm there as a guiding hand and to add the strategic context to things. But I'll let Karen loose on it if that's okay with you, Stephen.
It's definitely all right. I will turn to Karen. Thank you.
Thank you. So one of the objectives for the local housing companies this year was to produce its own development strategy, so that we aren't solely reliant on commissions coming from Wokingham Borough Council, so that we are looking toward the future for growth and improving our financial viability through that growth. In terms of recommendation, once again, we are just asking you to review this strategy. It is in draft. It has been presented to both the Lodden Homes and Berrybrook Board, as well as having been reviewed by CLT, who have provided their feedback. Now, the feedback that we have received to date has not been incorporated into the version that you are seeing. We have been asked to make greater reference to the Community Vision, Council Plan and Emerging Local Plan, which we will make sure that we do, so that it becomes once again, as to echo you, Stephen, a complementary plan for development. The audience generally is an internal document, so for the council and for the local housing companies to have a clear sense of direction in terms of our strategy moving forward. There isn't anything particularly that I want to draw your attention to. We have given details around a vision and some objectives. Both boards are generally on board with those objectives in terms of doubling our numbers over the next 5 years, but the plan is built specifically to be flexible, so that we can be agile and adjust it as and when we go along. So if there was any comments, anything you would like to see referenced or included, I'll happily take those away with me.
Well, thank you very much. I'll turn to you in a moment, Pauline. Just quickly to say, I'm very relieved you say that the feedback hasn't been incorporated, because I was going to mention both the community's vision and its ambition for inclusive communities, which is what we as a council are very keen to promote. Very happily, that is the view of our residents too. They want to see inclusive communities, which is excellent. So I was hoping that that might feature in there. But I was also hoping that the new local plan ambitions for 40% affordable housing on major developments would also find a place in that report. So it's good that we're going to be able to weave those in. Thank you.
I think as well it's really important to note is that we want to see the resident voice coming through the development strategy. You know, we want them to be represented, and their say is very important in terms of how we move forward. So you will see themes of that coming through as well.
That's excellent. Thank you for that. I mean, that may even shade into the work we're doing with users of our social care services, Social Care Future, which is about listening to the voice of the users of our services and trying to ensure that we respond appropriately to that. And obviously one of the key things for users of social care is accommodation. And so I think if that might find a mention in there too. Pauline, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I've got 3 questions. The first one's page 25. The private rented sector box top left says full market rent, and I was surprised by that. I'm not necessarily against it, but how does that align with the objectives of being affordable when we're then going to be developing something that costs exactly the same as the private market?
I'll let you answer.
Cool.
I'll come in if I need.
So it's about identifying a gap in the housing market locally, so that trusted, stable landlord that offers a private rented product to those residents of the borough that can afford it but can't find it because it's not readily available to them. The figures of people renting privately in the borough are lower than they are elsewhere. So that suggests there isn't the provision of housing.
Or it may be that people are buying rather than renting because of the cost of rent.
I think the cost of buying is and the cost of renting is a very big problem in Wokingham Borough. The intervention here is not in the affordable housing piece. It's an intervention in the private rental market designed to generate a revenue that will help the companies and help in the delivery of affordable housing indirectly rather than directly. But we're also trying to improve the quality of private rental accommodation and the quality of landlords. And I think an intervention by our housing companies will up the quality of the market. That's the intention, and that's the ambition, and I fully support it. Prue, you wanted to come in on this point.
Desperate to come in this point. Yes.
Agitating very desperately.
One of the biggest reasons for people seeking council housing is that they have not managed to find property, or they've been evicted from property in the private rented sector. There's just a huge shortage of it, and part of the problem is landlords who evict people, no-fault evictions, in order to put the rent up for the next lot of people. And it's very, very difficult for families who have to move every 6 months or every year. Very, very disruptive. So I think the vision is to have something more stable for people to live in. So it is full market rent. I was going to make not a dissimilar point to Paul, but that it needs to be nuanced, that it's not pushing at the ceiling. It's actually something that is compatible with the full market rent, so not discounted, but not at the top of the, they are not always looking to increase it. It's actually about stability.
It is about stability, you're right, but it's also important to recognise that not only is there an inadequate supply of private rental accommodation at the moment, that the pressure is actually to shrink existing provision, not grow it, because a lot of smaller private landlords have exited the market, partly because of changes in the tax regime and regulation, and partly because some of them in recent times have felt under financial pressure because of inflationary pushes on their own income, and therefore have decided that they will sell rather than continue to rent. So we have a private rental market that is in itself not big enough and is in danger of shrinking further. So actually intervening in it, I think, will be very positive development. Imogen, you also want to come in on this?
Yeah, I mean, on the private rental thing, I mean, like Prue, my inbox is full of basically families who are being evicted and can't find anything in their affordable range, and they've got kids in school, and it looks quite desperate. I'm very keen to see longer rents than 6 months, 1 year, which is what you get on the private market. What rental periods are we offering on these private rentals? Is it like 5 years, or what's going on with that?
So the detail around the PRS product hasn't quite been ironed out yet, and as that report comes to you in October, I'd hope to answer a lot of the questions in regards to that. I think what we would most likely look at is periodic rolling tenancies, so there is no end date, and with the
because security of tenure is obviously
exactly, and also
vital.
you know, in terms of the rent that is set, we talked at the workshop that we would be looking at those households that are just about managing, and what we can then provide them is, you know, we will take the rent as low as possible while still making the scheme financially viable, because we've got to be able to make the property run and look after its long-term maintenance requirements. But then they can have a degree of certainty around those rent increases as well, rather than getting walloped with massive rent increases.
So I think it's the words full market rent that are the problem, actually, because that isn't, it's sort of similar to full market rent, but it's not the same ethos, and it's not quite the same. So what you're talking about is non-subsidised rental rather than necessarily full market rent, I think.
Yeah, so we can change the terminology around that, that's fine.
But we do need to remember that
It's still trying to make money, though.
importance of trying to generate money, which can then be ploughed back into the provision of affordable housing. That's part of the ambition here. Prue.
To make a slightly different point, there's no mention here of key worker housing, and I wonder whether that's considered as a category somewhere in the ideas.
Again, that was picked up at the workshop, so I would expect to see some themes relating to key worker housing coming through.
Great, thank you.
So the second question I had was sort of the opposite. Under shared ownership, you've got a target rent of 1.5% value of unsold equity. So firstly, that sounded low to me, with inflation and the cost of capital. And secondly, I was surprised you set it as a percentage rather than as a relative to inflation percentage or relative to interest rates percentage, because you could, if you set it at 1.5%, you could, if inflation goes back up to 10%, you're going to be in deep trouble. So I was surprised it was as low. I was wanting to know whether that was normal, and then how does it work in the varying cost of capital market?
So 1.5% is low when compared with other boroughs. It never exceeds 2.25%, but the 1.5% is council policy in order to make that tenure of housing affordable to residents. In terms of the rent increase, that increases as per the lease terms, and because rent is set so low at 1.5%, rent increases for shared ownership is RPI plus 0.5% as opposed to CPI plus 1%, which is what we see for our social and affordable housing.
So in which case that target rent of 1.5% is probably not right. So if you're saying RPI plus 5%, plus 0.5%, it makes more sense to me.
But it's 1.5% of the unsold equity. So if someone buys 40% of their home, that is the bit that they own and they pay a mortgage on, and then the remaining 60%, their rent is set at 1.5% of that rent. That's how the financial modelling is set by
But if we've
England.
borrowed the money to buy the bit that they don't own, we could end up making a stonking great loss on that if interest rates are high.
We also get grant for delivering those houses, and that's how the regulator sets the formula.
So you're saying it's not our risk?
No, the financial modelling will be done taking into account the rent level. You obviously as well get the large cash injection up front for the sold equity share.
So I'd like to be assured that we can't get in a position where if interest rates go back up high, we don't end up in a position where we're making a loss on the borrowed capital that we've borrowed to buy the bit of the house that the residents do not own.
Yeah, we can give you some detailed workings around that so you can see how all of that works, but that has not been our experience to date with fluctuating interest rates.
Yeah, and bearing in mind that in 2022, 23 we had 10% inflation, and yet this model was robust enough at that stage to resist that.
Yeah. I don't know that.
Well, we hope you will be convinced in due course when you get the information. And just in case anyone had forgotten, this is a draft strategy. We're going to get the full version reported back to us in October for our endorsement and comments and endorsement. So you will have another bite of the cherry.
I've got one more question, only one, honestly.
Okay.
So sort of linked to that, on page 28, one of the objectives is to deliver 4 shared ownership properties per year, generating an income after cost of sales of 200,000 per annum. Now again, what about the cost of capital? I don't think the cost of sales is the only cost. What's the profit?
I'd have to give you a detailed case so that you can see the workings rather than talking to it now. But the loan is taken out over the lifetime of the property, so up to 40 years, 60 years, depending on the appraisal model that's been used.
So it could be just the way it's worded?
Yes.
I was just a bit worried that it was after cost of sales.
Yeah.
Whilst actually it's not cost of sales, it's cost of providing the house, which is a bit different.
Yeah.
I think that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Stephen, I would like to add in terms of the response there as well, that I think the wording in that particular objective was linked to the exercise we did on the 24-25 shared ownership properties that we acquired as well. So that was obviously dipping our toe in the water for the first time in a while since I think Arnott Avenue. And that proved to be what the kind of like the numbers were. But I want to emphasise, and Karen's absolutely right, each financial appraisal now is checked, double checked and triple checked so that we don't run any risk of bankrupting either the council or the local housing company in any venture that we might want to explore. We've got quite a robust way of doing the financial modelling, and that's been part of the deep dive exercise, just to give you that assurance, Pauline, that we wouldn't enter into any deal where we felt the risk. And I think, you know, Arm Corner was a really good example of that, where we just didn't feel as though it was in the interest of the council or in the housing companies. But yeah, I think those from recollection, I think those numbers probably came from the example of the shared ownership at Matthews Green that we've had success with. But we will revisit that as part of the draft and the consultation. And I did want to say that very much we want your feedback, so please contact Karen directly with your comments on this strategy so we get it right for when it's brought back to you in October.
Thank you very much, Simon. Okay, so I think we can move on, having noted progress with the draft, and look forward to seeing the final version, we hope, in October. Thank you very much, Karen, and thank you for your contribution as well, Simon. Now, we're moving on to item 29, Consolidated Company Key Performance Indicator Compliance Data. Your name again, Simon, is on this. Is it this time you?
No, it's protocol again with lead officer
I think we're going to have to change protocol.
Well, indeed,
we need the name of the person who's truly responsible.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
but Karen, yes, Karen, please, Stephen.
Karen, over to you again.
So these are the end of year key performance indicators for 24-25. Again, we're just asking the committee to note the information that's provided and ask any questions. We've also included an end-of-year exception report that provides a little bit more detail regarding the data that you've been given. Overall, in terms of performance, the KPI metrics are very positive, and both the board have kind of expressed their kind of happiness at those performance metrics. The areas that I would like to draw attention to in terms of slight concern is the lack of data regarding repairs and maintenance as per last quarter. I don't think the new contract is news to anybody. We expect to see that data start coming through again from July this year as we get a full month's report from the new repairs and maintenance contract Cardo. The outstanding fire risk recommendations, the board and then subsequently yourselves will get a report with regards to closure for all outstanding actions from period 24-25, and the data that comes through in the next reporting period will be reflective of all new actions that have been generated as a result of our new fire risk assessment cycle. There has been an increase in complaints in the quarter, especially within Berrybrook Homes. This is largely due to the exiting repairs and maintenance contract, and we fully expected that to happen. We've worked closely with tenants and our colleagues in the housing service in order to resolve all of those complaints, and they are now all closed.
Thank you very much, Karen. On the change of housing contractor, obviously the HRA has experienced exactly the same challenge as the housing companies. We know the performance of the previous contractor declined. A lot of the problem was IT systems and the lack of appropriate IT systems. I'm very relieved to be able to say that the new contractor, Cardo, has, by the sound of it, extremely good and effective IT systems that mean I think we will get reporting and the necessary data in a much more timely manner. So I'm quite optimistic about the chances of a long-term improvement in quality and in particular in reporting data, which has been the real problem. So I think we can look forward to things improving in that regard.
Ask a quick question. Obviously, they haven't been in very long, but are you happy with what's happened so far?
Generally, the feedback and the experience with them has been very positive. We held a community event at Phoenix Avenue yesterday, and what we found is a lot of residents have been withholding reporting repairs in the past, and now we're beginning to see those coming through. And residents yesterday were speaking very positively.
Yeah. Again, that mirrors the experience in the HRA, and it is clear that there were some outstanding bits of work not completed by the previous contractor, and Cardo has picked up on those and completed them. So I think this has been a painful and difficult period, and it was almost inevitable it would be the case. Any transition from one contractor to another can be difficult. But we seem to be through the worst of that now, and I hope things are now going to really improve. Did you want to ask some questions? No, there is a surprise. Ask away.
I did read it. I was a bit worried about the outstanding medium risk fire audit points. Talking about that, I'm also interested in your preparedness for your external audit when you get it as a provider.
So in terms of the fire risk recommendations that are outstanding, we are working with the compliance team at the council to close all of those immediately. None of the risks that have been presented to us present risk to life or property, with a lot of them transferring over to managed risks. So, as I said, the report that comes through in July will give rationale for the closure of all of those risks so that we can put them to bed and move on to the next cycle of fire risk assessments.
Does that mean they were, does that mean they were over-egged when they were set as medium if you're going to be essentially accepting them?
Yes, some of them. It depends on the assessor. All interpretations of fire risk recommendations that come out are open to interpretation by the assessor that you've had at that time. That's why we're going through each of them and reviewing them all.
So just again on that, so you're not worried about your forthcoming audit any more than...
So the forthcoming audit is of Woking Borough Council rather than the local housing companies or lodge and home. So as a small registered provider, we are not inspected. The only risk that is posed to lodge and homes is if there was a significant failing with Woking Borough Council and a service that they provide to us. It may then cause the regulator to do a spot inspection, which they are entitled to. But yeah, that would be Woking Borough Council being audited, not us.
Yeah, the audit is entirely for the councils.
How big do you have to be before you become big enough to audit?
Over 1,000 homes.
It'll be a while. Okay.
Yes, it may be sooner than you think. Karen has her way.
So,
right.
Another question on that, sorry, just slightly connected. I saw the information about voids and evictions and that sort of stuff. How do you stop people subletting your property?
Close relationships with the housing officer, having eyes on the ground. Yeah.
And you think it works, do you?
Yeah, I can speak to you about that after this meeting.
Okay. And the final one, just to be extremely picky, I thought that the report said Little Horse Close had an ASB case, but you're saying none on the KPI. Is that because it belongs somewhere else?
It's because it got closed. So that was talking about, so the data, is that for the March period where it says 0?
Yeah. Yeah,
so the exception report is an end of year summary. So that is talking about ones that appeared earlier in the year. But the ASB case there got closed.
And just again on those things, why is your percentage of void rent loss increasing? It was 1.1, it then became 1.5, 1.7, 2.0, 2.2, 2.6. I'm not saying it shouldn't, I'm just interested to know why.
I can't answer it exactly off the top of my head, but I think it's because it's a cumulative figure that builds throughout the year. Yeah, I think that's an error. So if you look at the line above, that reports on our void loss figures, which increase each month, and then that is reflective of the percentage below. So this is the last time that the KPIs will come exactly like this. There will be some changes in the next reporting period, and I'll make sure that's captured then.
Okay, all finished? Lovely. Any other questions anyone wishes to put? Thank you very much, Karen, for that. That was really helpful. So we move on to item 30, which is Consolidated Local Housing Companies Provisional Outturn. And it's not Karen. Goodness me.
And it's not Kajal, whose name is at the end of the report, Stephen. It will be me, actually, to run through the outturn, provisional outturn for 24-25. So, not going to, conscious of time, the position really of the consolidated group, as it were, was an operating loss of just over 900,000 or 0.9 million, and that was specifically as a result of the accounting adjustments which we referred to earlier on, and the tidying up of a lot of legacy historical transactions, etc. In real terms, that's caused Loddon to project a profit of just over 1.2 million, but in real terms that trading position would be just around 114,000 profit, and that really does represent a re-entry into the development activity which we've referred to, etc., with the shared ownerships, and absorb some settlement of previous years' cyclical maintenance costs, etc., that we've agreed with the council as well. Berrybrook, slightly less positive position, an operating loss, which was better than what we were anticipating at the beginning of the year. So again, moving forward in small steps, and that also absorbs an extra £83,000 worth of previous year's cyclical maintenance costs, which we've now agreed on, having been outstanding. So, you know, as I say, it's all positive. We've made some adjustments on Wokingham Housing to get that cleaned up in balance sheet terms, and the intercompany balances adjustments, the accounting adjustments have affected them, as they have indeed Holdings in tidying things up as well. And you're moving from a potential small profit within Holdings to a one-off loss in year. But as I say, I'm really focused, and I know Graham Ebers is as well, on that bigger picture of how this is all shaping up to take the companies forward in the medium term. And I think what we did in 24-25 really sets us up for, you know, focusing on the trading operation in the management companies of Loddon and Berrybrook, rather than the holding company and the former development company, as it were. So that's really all I wanted to say on there. There's the detail of each company in terms of its a little table for each one, a little bit more detail on it. But again, I think we've covered it in a lot of the narrative and discussion tonight. More than happy to take any questions from you, Stephen, and other members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. And again, this is the moment to repeat those thanks I gave earlier to Kajal and Karen and everyone else in the team for the work they've done in dealing with the, if I can put it bluntly, the rather messy situation we had with the finances. They brought clarity to it, which has been lacking in the past. So I'm really pleased to see that. And we are moving in the right direction. So thank you very much to everyone involved in that. If you could pass
I will do
to Kajal in her absence.
I will do, Chair, and also thanks to council officers as well, particularly the likes of Graham Cadle, Mark Thompson and Graham Ebers, who've you know, helped us enormously in sorting out what we needed to do around these accounting adjustments. And the other thing is, and the real good news, and it's covered at the top of page 52, and we should never lose sight of it, is that the group holds assets of 53 million with only liabilities of around 18.8, so a real good net asset position, and that should always be accentuated, I think, when we're talking about all the downside of the activities in the group.
Yeah, you're quite right, and I should have included officers within the council in my thanks, but you're also quite right about the really strong operating position where we've got these assets, and Prue, I think, was about to make that very point, so you've stolen her thunder.
I beg your pardon.
But don't worry, it was a good thing to highlight. Imogen, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I can see we've got lots of assets. I can see things are going in the right direction. When are we Do we have an expectation of when we are likely to see the loss being turned around on these?
Well, I'm confident that we'll see an operating profit within Loddon in the current year, depending on how we move forward with WBC Holdings Limited. But obviously, we've got a lot of discussion and a lot of analysis to do on that, Imogen, before we come back to members with a position as to how the holding company needs to exists, etc. And what liabilities might befall that. So we're working through that methodically in the same way that we have done with the previous year's accounting adjustments. And it says that, you know, in the budget, it's the next paper actually, but in the budget for 25-26, we've built in some assumptions which we hope to repeat as we did in 24-25, particularly around shared ownership, to get us into that operating profit world, particularly for Loddon. Bit more of concern is Berrybrook, you know, in terms of how we actually turn that deficit or that loss into a break-even position, you know, going forward, and indeed, you know, a profit eventually. But if we do make some progress with the private rented market, etc., and we do perhaps look at other structural advantages and continue on with our financial deep dive, which you know, we were able to do some work within Berrybrook's portfolio that's produced a better financial position for the companies, then again it's all part of that general movement forward. And as a group, it's still a positive position after we do these accounting adjustments. So I think, you know, I'm expecting things to emerge, and this is one of the reasons why we want to do that medium-term financial planning over the 3 to 5 years. But I'm expecting that timescale to turn this around completely, and you have a local housing company stroke companies which are presenting you know, a return to invest into affordable housing within Wokingham and supported and specialist.
Okay, thank you.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much, Simon. I think we all share that ambition and would like to get there as soon as we can. Pauline, it would be very strange if you hadn't got some questions.
The main questions are about Berrybrook, actually. Firstly, I didn't really I wondered what the problem was behind the line that says the outcome includes 83.3 thousand in legacy, cyclical and maintenance charges from prior years, especially seeing as the previous report said we'd had trouble getting our maintenance done. So is this that we hadn't been billed for it, or it's been posted in the wrong place, or what?
It's work that we hadn't been billed for, and it's not actually to do with the old Reading Homes contract, Pauline. It was actually to do with our cyclical maintenance, which is our planned maintenance of, you know, boilers and electrics and heating and ventilation and mechanical works in different places. And it was costs which we were still to resolve and agree on with the council.
So it's
but
the
that's
council
all been dealt. All been,
the council
all been
not
dealt
billing
now.
you, is that right?
Well, it wasn't a question of them not billing us. It was a question of us finalising what the actual bill was, so that they could bill us. But that's all been dealt with now, and that money now, in credit terms, is in the HRA. It was a cost to the housing company, but a credit to the HRA.
Thank you, that helps.
That's what we call complementarity.
Yeah, or wooden dollars. Is Berrybrook just too small?
Well, it probably hasn't done what it was originally intended, and I think it would have to be said that probably what its stock represents at the moment is kind of social housing. So that's one of the things that we are looking at, Pauline, in terms of how that would work. But obviously the regulator has certain parameters and criteria for which how much, if you like, private stock you can manage and what have you. So we're looking at that as all part of the total restructuring of the group, and it's work that we will bring back to shareholder committee in due course when we've completed that bit of work as to what is most advantageous for the council and the companies in structure and governance.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Thank you very much, and thank you, Simon and Kajal and Karen and everybody else involved, and our officers, for all their work in helping reconcile some of the long-standing challenges. in accountancy terms. So can we move on then to item 31, which is to note the budget for Loddon Homes and Berrybrook Homes for 2025-26.
Yeah.
Simon,
It's me again.
It is really you. Okay.
It is, yeah. But I really do feel as though every single word in this report has been mentioned somewhere in the narrative that we've had this evening. Just glancing at it. So, in the interests of your time, etc., I'd be more than happy to just take some questions if there were any, Stephen. I think that's probably best for all. I don't think there's anything that I massively want to draw to your attention that I haven't already covered, if I'm honest.
No, I think that's completely acceptable, and obviously the structure of the meeting has meant that we've touched upon a lot of important stuff already. So, are there any questions?
I've got one.
I was going to say, you're not going to disappoint us and not have a question.
I've got. So firstly, I'd like to thank Simon for the answers that he sent me before the meeting, which means I haven't got as many as I thought I might have, and thank Graham for passing the questions on. The only question I've got now is the profit and loss on disposal. 17,000 or 17 million? 17,000. Why are we projecting a loss on disposal? Or have I misunderstood it? And I know you tried to explain it to me, and I didn't understand it.
Karen may be able to help me.
I can answer that one if you're not sure, Simon.
Yeah, go on. Well,
One of our shared owners is staircasing to 100%, and at that point you have to repay grant.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So is that really a loss then? Because all you're doing is repaying something that you were given in the first place. So why is that a loss?
I'm going to go down to the accounting of how you treat the grant, because I know you have to depreciate it over the life of the grant.
Yeah. We've already depreciated it, so we haven't got the grant on the books. We've just got the payment of it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Thank you. In effect.
Yeah.
I said in effect, yes, and I think Simon agreed.
I do, yes. There's an acronym at the bottom of the page there, which is EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortisation. It's highly technical in the accounting world. I confess to not fully understand it, but Karen's right. I think it's the fact that it's being prematurely staircased in terms of what we would have anticipated, and therefore there is a grant penalty, as it were, and that's why it's shown in that particular way.
So is that a risk going forward if lots of people try and do that? And is there any financial... Yeah, I'm sure it is, but just in case, is there any financial...
redress.
Well, is there any financial redress? Is there any protection we can take out that means that we don't have the risk of a sudden issue on the books because a few people have done it? I think,
yeah, I mean, we would have to come back to you on the technical detail of that, Pauline, and what have you. But I think the risk of that happening would be highly improbable. I mean, you know, if we took out four shared ownership, probably 6, if you like, as we did last year, all 6 to staircase to 100% within 12 months would be, you know, it would be staggering odds, I would have thought, but we will come back to you on the technical side of it.
Thank you.
That's where you have to strike a balance between, you know, what the real risk is and what the costs of mitigating it might be.
Yeah, I'm just interested in the potential risk.
Yeah, there is a potential risk, but I think it is small. I think it's probably the answer at this stage. But we're going to give you a bit more detail, I hope. Okay. Have we reached that happy moment where we've finished our questions on this final item on our agenda? I think we have. So all it remains for us to do is thank everyone for their attendance, thank the officers of our companies for their attendance, and thank the officers of the council for their attendance, and thank the elected members on the shareholder committee for being here too. So thank you very much, everyone. And we still have a little bit of the evening to enjoy. So thank you very much. Yeah, not that much. Not that much to enjoy. Thank you, Simon.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night, Simon.